Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Motor City Mad Mouse Show. You guessed it, I am the Motor City Mad Mouse, Scott Morganroth. Please be joined by my two co-hosts, George Eichhorn and Jeremy Ballrick. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Good to be here again.
All right,
Always good to be here.
obviously the Lions are gearing up for the Tennessee Titans, so let's go ahead and give every Lions fan an opportunity to get stoked about it. We're going to talk about Jared Goff's last three games. He has 3 wins, 7 touchdowns, no interception, 83.5% completion percentage, and 887 yards. All right, George, what's your take on Jared Goff's recent streak?
Nothing short of sensational. I mean, I'm hearing all kinds of things, records of pass percentage and completion in the 80s and touchdowns. And like you said, no interceptions. The guy's just playing out of his mind right now. We all knew in Detroit, uh, most fans knew that, he was on his way for another good season, obviously. But, just because they lost one game, some people try to jump off and say something bad about him. But this guy's serious. This guy is a team player. This guy means so much to this team and this community. It doesn't surprise me at all. He's using a lot of receivers. He's distributing the ball well, as they say in basketball. But he's doing that too as the signal caller here in Detroit. I'm amazed by him, and interested to see what you guys have to add to that.
We'll transition over to Jeremy.
Well, it's not just that it's been such a great run. I mean, the one game he was 18 for 18. Let's let's not sugarcoat it. That had never been done before. I believe the last time that anybody did that, it was 15 of 15 by Kurt Warner back in 2000 during the greatest show on turf. I mean, we're talking rarefied air. That's a Hall of Famer. And he's had 2 back-to-back games where he didn't throw an incompletion for the first half. That's the first time that's happened since Peyton Manning. So he's doing things that average QBs don't do. So that makes him not an average QB. And even Colin Cowherd, he was talking about he has more total touchdowns right now than Lamar Jackson with his rushing touchdowns and his receiving touchdowns. And let's not forget, he's got a receiving touchdown. Usually the only guys that get that are the ones when it's batted up in the air and they catch it on accident themselves, a la Pat Mahomes.
Yes.
So, it's been an amazing run, and I'm happy to be seeing it. I'm happy to be writing about it. He was the FedEx Air Player of the Week twice,
Right.
and out of these 3 games. So he's having one hell of a season. And right now, I believe the only guy ahead of him, because he does have one more total touchdown than Goff, is Lamar Jackson. But he has one less win. So I give the leg to Goff.
Well, I would have never thought in my wildest dreams that the trade with Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff would turn out this way. Granted, Stafford has a Super Bowl. Goff has been to one, but Goff has beaten Stafford in their head-to-head meetings 2-1. First of all, okay, and not only has he beaten them 2-1, he's led the Lions to 2 playoff wins, first time in over 50 to 60 years. Unbelievable, and the first time that they managed to get a playoff victory since they hammered the Dallas Cowboys back, I believe it was in 1991, right? And if I recall
Yes.
correctly, Eric Kramer was the quarterback at that time. So, I mean, it's amazing what Brad Holmes has done to not only get draft capital back, but you really took 2 overall number 1 picks, okay, and swapped them. Sean McVay didn't want them, right? And Dan Campbell is thriving with them. So
Yeah. Yeah.
the one thing about Goff is the man does have a lot of accuracy. He really does. And I don't care if you're managing a game. So what? You don't need style points to win in the NFL. Most people think you need that 400 yard per game. You don't need that at all. You really don't need it. And I think the Lions are showing to me exactly what a lot of people have said. This guy's a good quarterback. He's won the city over to begin with, right? Anytime you can chant Jared Goff and it's all over the state. I mean, think about it, all over the state. That blows me away. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Brad Holmes is a genius. He really, really is, and that's why the Lions are flourishing under them. And Dan Campbell, you know what? I got news for you. He doesn't care who his quarterback is. Well, he does, but he doesn't because he's going to make it work no matter what the situation is. And as we know against the Minnesota Vikings, Jeremy mentioned it last night on another show that we had done. That you putting your coach puts you in a situation where you're at your own 38-yard line. It's almost like spotting your opponent 7 points, which indeed the Lions did do, and Jared Goff still overcame it. So more power to him.
Yeah. For sure. And he has, like I said, he has the weapons. They've got a good balance on running and passing. And, Brad Holmes, hey, he worked for the Rams. He knew what type of athlete he had in Goff. Maybe
Right.
Sean McVay didn't know, but certainly Brad Holmes and that front office knew. And yeah, it's to me, it's phenomenal what he has accomplished here in the short time in Detroit.
Well, not only that, you got Ben Johnson calling the shots as your offensive coordinator, and a good offensive coordinator sits down with his quarterback on the sidelines when he's there, and you talk to the
Fuck.
guy. Is what
Yep.
you did, and that's exactly what Ben Johnson. He's a head coach in waiting somewhere, but like you said, he's looking to get that Super Bowl with Detroit, and then he'll proceed to the next level. So, any last things you want to add, Jeremy?
Well, if you think about it, the picks from the Stafford trade, originally it was 2 firsts and a third. It was a third round pick in 2021. That equaled Ifeatu Melifonwu. Pretty good player when he's able to be on the field, right?
Right.
Jamison Williams, Josh Pascal. That was the 2022 pick. And then he traded back and ended up getting 3 picks back from the Arizona Cardinals. And that turned into Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, and Broderick Martin. Now, other
Yeah.
than Broderick Martin, everybody there has contributed to this
Yes.
winning streak that we've had. But Broderick Martin, even though he didn't get used a lot last year, if you look at the 18 snaps he did play, it equaled 10 double teams and a tackle for loss. So
Yeah.
while it was very limited usage, it was very good when he was on the field.
Right.
Yeah. For sure. Is it still early to call this the heist of the century?
Uh, well, they got their Super Bowl. Les
Well,
Snead in
yeah, true.
2021, and actually ever since they drafted Jared Goff, every year after that, they didn't have a first round pick because of the trades for Jalen Ramsey and the trade for Matthew Smith. He was the guy that GM started doing the whole F these picks, let's win a bowl, you know. And
Yeah.
then he did it even more in 2021 because he traded for Leonard Floyd and he traded for Von Miller mid-season, and then they picked up the recently waived OBJ from the Browns.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's some shrewd
Yeah.
wheeling and
I'd rather
dealing.
stick with Detroit's cast.
Well,
I
I don't know if Holmes knows anything about Jimmy Johnson, but that's what Jimmy Johnson did to the Minnesota Vikings a
The fleece.
while back.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah, he fleeced them big time. I mean,
Yeah.
you could
trading him to
ship
Herschel
Herschel.
Walker.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we won't get into that tonight, but
Yep.
what we will get into is this. It's called Lessons from the Microphone: Tuning into the Enduring Wisdom of Visionary Leaders, written by yours truly, myself. Pretty much all you have to know about is old school media versus new school media. If there's any students watching the show, this is a good book for students. It's a good general book for anybody that wants to get to know what our industry is about.
Here,
You
here.
can go out there and talk about our industry and say how bad we are, the media. I get that. But I do the best I can to break down how it used to be versus what it is now. And just so you know, Lessons from the Microphone can be found on Barnes and Noble. You got Kindle and Amazon. And if you want to find out where else, go to www.southfloridatribune.com, and there's a link to get it there as well. So with that said, okay, we talked about the fleets of the century. Okay, we'll continue the that in the Lions' last 4 games, they have 16 offensive touchdowns versus, I'm sorry, 16. Did I say that right? Okay.
18.
Oh,
18 offensive touchdowns.
okay. They updated it.
Yeah, it's 18 offensive touchdowns and only 16 incompletions.
Okay. All right, thanks for correcting me on that. The information I had was otherwise, but yeah. So it's 18 offensive TDs, 16 incompletions. Thanks, Jeremy. Now, mind you, going into this weekend's game, the Kansas City Chiefs, by the way, added DeAndre Hopkins to that potent offense, and that's going to be a huge move for them. But going back to the original point, the only team with more offensive TDs than in completions in a 4 game span since the merger. So this is the only team since the merger that has these crooked numbers. George Eichhorn, some thoughts.
18 offensive touchdowns and so few incompletions. Yeah, I mean, this is again rarefied air. I mean, these are just statistics that kind of boggle the mind for a lot of football fans, NFL fans. But it takes a lot of practice. It takes hard work. The team, the culture change, and how they're behind Dan Campbell and his staff, it goes a long way towards that. I mean, they're playing for every single play. They're not taking plays off. They're not taking a rest or saying, oh, defeatist attitude. Oh, we're never going to make this first down. Heck no, that's not part of this culture in Detroit. So it takes everybody. It really does. I mean, whether it's blocking, whether it's receptions, whether it's running the ball, whether it's him throwing the ball. I mean, it takes everybody to make it work. We all know that, and the blocking downfield and at the line has been incredible for Detroit. So, yeah, I mean, it is an awesome stat, and the stats that keep happening or keep being brought forward are quite remarkable, especially in Detroit. We haven't seen stuff like that. I mean, Matthew Stafford had a great career here. There's no question about it, but it wasn't the winning career that everybody had hoped for. So again, hats off to Ben Johnson. You alluded to him earlier. This guy's unbelievable. He's trick plays and everything else. And the game plan going into every game.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Well, 18 offensive touchdowns and only 16 incompletions. You know, I'm impressed with the 18 offensive touchdowns, but how impressed with 16 incompletions? And remember, in one of those games, there was none.
Right.
Right.
Something
Right.
no one in the NFL had done in the history since 1940 as far as being more than 15 completions. So it was 1940. So basically, a few years after the invention of the forward pass, they had one guy go perfect then. And then it was Kurt Warner who passed that by one in 2002. And then it's Jared Goff. So how crazy is that since you're talking about over almost 100 years of history in the NFL?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty
And
impressive.
and he's the only one to have that many completions without incompletions. And he broke another record, is what I heard, or tied another record with another rarefied quarterback. He had back-to-back games in the first half where he threw no incompletions whatsoever, and that's the first time that's been done since Peyton Manning.
It's pretty impressive. I don't know much more I can add to it. All I can tell you one thing, and then people may think I'm crazy. When the Lions made the move for Jared Goff, they thought they were doing the Rams a favor by taking the salary off their hands. Is what they were really looking to do, and they got all that draft capital, and the Rams were willing to give it to them just to get them out of there. All of a sudden, I would have made, as crazy as it seems, but I'm not a general manager. I would have made the Stafford Goff trade straight up, but I'm not the GM, people, fans. Okay, I'm not. That's why you got guys like Brad Holmes in the current positions that they are in. I mean, you're talking about 2 number 1 picks traded for one another. One of them's a little bit younger, the other one's on the backside of his career, and the other one has won a Super Bowl. The other one's been to a Super Bowl. And I got to tell you, it just makes me wonder, though. Let's think about this for a second, okay? If Jared Goff, I said if, okay, Jared Goff gets the Lions to the Super Bowl, let alone win it. Can you imagine, George? You and I, we've been in the town a long time. I've been away from it here, moving to Florida. What would the reaction be, George, if the Lions even get to the Super Bowl under Jared Goff?
Well, I mean, if any indication comes like it did last January for the playoff games, then Jeremy, you remember this as well. The town just goes ape. you know what. And I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what. And then if they should win it, but I know we're not saying that, Scott, because we all know the Big P, the parade. I mean, it would dwarf anything that this city has ever seen. Now that's hard to say, and we were there at the draft, so we know those crowds were humongous. So it probably won't be that high, but there is going to be a, a parade if they win it all. But again, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but it's going to be the biggest sports parade, biggest. It already is the biggest story, but it's going to be even bigger. It's going to be even bigger, guys. We know that, and we've been there. We've seen those crowds for the Red Wing parade. Tigers, yeah, Pistons, but I think the hockey ones have been the biggest draw so far. The Red Wing ones. But that being said, yeah, I mean they saturate the media, they saturate everything: radio, TV, newspapers, internet. I mean, they pretty much control everything if they get that far. And they're just they're just fun to watch and they're fun to follow. And obviously, a winning team is what Detroit loves, also.
Well, when you think about it, though, they had 775,000 fans at the draft. That doesn't count all the other people wandering. We've already addressed it before, but it's certainly worth
Right.
reiterating again. So, yeah, I mean, 775,000 for the draft. I mean, they blew the last record away. And now Green Bay and all the other places are going to have a tough act to follow, knowing that the Lions went out there and set those attendance records. All right, I'm going to throw it back at Jeremy, okay? Let's just do the could you imagine. Okay, but let me add one more thing first. So, Jeremy, that just came to mind so I don't lose it. Okay. Remember in Chicago when the Cubs won it all? You knew darn well the White Sox weren't going to put on a big parade, but the Chicago Cubs breaking that 100-year drought and the fans that they had at the Windy City, that was pretty large. Okay, Jeremy, go ahead.
Um, I think about 95% of the fans from Michigan alone would be there. And we're said to have one of the biggest NFL fan bases in their home state of any team out there, other than possibly the Green Bay Packers, because what do Wisconsin have other than Green Bay? They got Milwaukee.
Right.
So I mean, that's pretty much it. That's all you got. Those are the two big towns. That's where everything happens. And then they got University of Wisconsin and Madison. That's their three big things. And Madison isn't known as much for their fandom of the football team as they're known for having the most bars in the United States per capita.
Well,
So that's more of Party Central.
Yeah, you ever been to Madison before?
Yes, I have, and I've been to about maybe 10% of the bars because I only visited one side of the town.
Okay, well, hey, with all due respect, at least you're speaking from experience. You didn't throw that out, but I have been to Madison, and I covered the Penn State Nittany Lions taking on the Wisconsin Badgers over at Camp Randall Stadium. I got to tell you guys a funny story when we covered this thing. The first time I did the jump around, I thought there was going to be an earthquake in the building. I'm like, really? And here I am, this high up there. And to make matters even more interesting, it was in November, and the day we had to go there, just think about it, the elevators broke down, and I had to go out there, and I had to go out there and maneuver. Is what we ended up.
Yeah, yeah. You had a lot. You had to walk a lot of steps, Scott.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a tremendous place to play college football. No question about it. I have not been there. I've been to Wisconsin, obviously, for your special occasion, and then one other time. But yeah, the fan base is incredible. I'm glad you mentioned that, Jared. Because that's so true. Jeremy, that's so true. I mean, Wisconsin's always been the proudest NFL franchise, let's say, but Detroit is right up there too. And look at the division they're in. My goodness,
Well,
those
for
teams.
for anybody that's ever been to Camp Randall Stadium and you see the jump around for the first time, you wonder, holy moly, what is this? But I got familiar with it, and now I get it. But at least it's off my bucket list because I went there before, and it's a pretty good game. Then we proceeded to cover Wisconsin down over in the Citrus Bowl as well. I believe they went ahead and took on South Carolina. Go ahead, Jeremy.
So my imagination wouldn't be a stretch to say that we might dwarf that Super Bowl parade that the LA Rams had by a million
Oh, I wouldn't
because
doubt
they
it.
only had 300,000 people show up for the Rams Super Bowl parade when Matthew Stafford walked out,
Well,
won it.
let me ask you a
Wow.
question. You ever been to L.A.?
No, but I know that they got millions, and I mean like Doctor Evil, millions
Yeah.
of
Okay.
people in that town.
Well, here's my count. Here's what I'm going to throw back at you. You've never been to LA. You've never been on the freeways or nothing. They're scattered all over the place on all those freeways. They're lucky to get 300,000. Seriously, Ballrick.
They
Seriously.
only got 3,000.
What?
You
Three?
said
3,000 people total showed up for their Super Bowl parade in LA
Oh,
really?
I didn't hear the
out of
3,000.
millions. Yes,
Oh,
that was all
yeah.
they had in attendance. Uh,
Wow.
Well,
but we do have another guy with some rarefied air that picked up. There's 6 games with his 464 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns
Yeah.
and 148 receiving yards and a touchdown. Jameer Gibbs becomes the first Lions player to have over 600 total yards of offense and 6 touchdowns since Barry frickin' Sanders.
Yeah, and you know what everybody wondered what the Lions were doing when they drafted this guy, and Brad Holmes once again outsmarted them. That's the final word on this topic. Don't ever go out there and doubt Brad Holmes if you know what's good for you. Final thing we're going to talk about tonight, just so you know, Motor City Madmouth, sponsored by Lessons from the Microphone, tuning into the enduring wisdom of visionary leaders. I wrote this book, I'm proud of it. Hope to be able to write another one by the end of the year or into next year so I can find other stories that didn't make the first book. But, anyways, we're going to stay on the Lions theme here as well. It had to be a great feel good moment for Jake Bates, kicking the game-winning field goal in a 31-29 win over Minnesota. How long was that field goal? I'm trying to remember.
44 yards.
44 yards. But when you think about it, 18 months ago, he thought he was going to be done with football, working as a brick salesman. Via, the Lions didn't have to go very far to scout this guy. You ever heard of the Michigan Panthers? You ever heard of the United Football League? You ever heard of Ford Field? You know what? I have a feeling that last year's game against Dallas in the playoffs would have been different if you had Jake Bates in there instead of Dan Campbell gambling every 2 seconds. So you know what? With that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jeremy. Am I right or wrong about last year's Dallas playoff game? You give me your thoughts about Jake Bates.
I'm glad he used to sell bricks and doesn't kick bricks because if he kicked bricks, he wouldn't be kicking game winners. But anyways,
I did.
Jake Bates, he set a record. And what was crazy is people don't realize this. The holder was in the wrong formation the first game in the when the USFL Panthers were going for the game-winning field goal.
Right.
And as they hike the ball, just before it leaves the ground, their own coach calls timeout to fix the spot where the holder is.
Mhm.
You want to know how far that field goal was that he kicked that actually made it through the uprights?
How far?
67 yards. He'd have broke what's his name, Justin Tucker's record that he set in Ford Field on Monday Night Football versus the Dan Campbell Lions in 2021.
Yeah.
So he'd have broke that record with his very first kick by where it was spotted. But because they did that and they moved everything and they set it up again and they set up the play again and they let the play clock run, they hike the ball. He makes the game winner anyways at 64 yards. Then he made a 62 yarder at Ford Field. Then he made a 59 yarder at Ford Field. Then he made 52, 57. He went 8 for 8 at Ford Field and 5 for 9 outside. So his only struggles have been outside, but it wasn't horrible.
Let me tell you something, Jeremy. With the amount of domes they're building this game these days, outside of maybe a few, I think Buffalo is building an open air stadium, if I remember correctly. I did a little bit checking on it. But you got Cleveland Browns eventually going to build one, and the Bears want to build a dome stadium. There won't be many outdoor climates that they'll have to kick in anyways.
So here's what I was getting at. This is why it's another act of brilliance by Brad Holmes.
Okay.
If you look at the Lions' schedule, they only have 3 outside games all year,
Yeah.
and one of them's coming up soon, next week. Not this week, next week.
Yeah, isn't it Green
Packers.
Bay, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And they got the Bears, I believe, outdoors, and I don't even know who the last
And then
one
the
is.
last one is San Francisco in week 17.
Yeah, with San Francisco, you're not going to have to deal with those cold temperatures. I know one thing about San Francisco though, because I've covered a couple of games there when I was at Candlestick Park. You may not have to deal with cold, frigid temperatures, but that wind around there, and I went to Candlestick Park, Jeremy. Okay, how much it's swirled, I can still imagine it might be a bit of a factor over in Santa Clara. But yeah, I only have three, so you're right. I mean, it wasn't stupid. He went out there and found a place where he didn't have to go very far, let alone the fact that he's familiar with that dome. So, but yeah, this guy's unbelievable, Jake Bates.
Yeah, I think it's great because Jake Bates finished his playoff run in that outside stadium versus the Birmingham Stallions that game.
Right.
He walked out taking his stuff out of his locker, and he walked back in and signed his contract at Allen Park.
Yeah, that was good. But you know why I'll say this, and I'll turn over to George. Wouldn't matter what gas prices would be to sign that contract from going to Ford Field over to the Lions facility. You can make it by at any gas prices, and I'm leaving it there. All right, George.
Well, this guy's just been phenomenal. Let's face it. He was undrafted, 2023 NFL draft, signed with the Houston Texans July 31st, 2023, was released on August the 12th. So it only lasted 13 days at the Texans training camp. And then he did not have another calling to play football until December, Christmas Day, 2023, when the Michigan Panthers made the call and signed him to a contract. I mean, this story is just unbelievable. You go back and you look at things that have happened and things that happen to certain people in sports, let alone football. And it's incredible. I mean, he loves soccer. He played college soccer at Central Arkansas, and then he transferred and played college football at Texas State. But even so, they were only using him on kickoffs, and he wasn't getting, well, except in practice, he was getting experience with trying to kick field goals, but he was used mostly as a kickoff specialist. And be able to come in to a league such as the NFL and do what he's done so far has just been nothing short of phenomenal. And he's a good kid. He's a good team player. He means well. And like Jeremy pointed out, he's got familiarity with these dome stadiums. He played for the Panthers in Ford Field. And folks, this doesn't happen overnight. And the only thing I could relate to, and Scott hates when I do this, but I'll do it anyways. When's the last time the Detroit Tigers scouted any of those four baseball teams that play in Utica, just miles down the road from Comerica Park? And this kind of reminds me of that, is that the Lions are smart, as are other NFL teams, obviously, scouting these kids in the United Football League and being able to then promote and sign the ones that are deemed most worthy, obviously, for a tryout or for a signing. So hats off to, again, Brad Holmes and the scouting department for finding this guy, as they say, right in their own backyard.
Well, here's the thing. Let's face the reality. How many times has the Vikings beaten the Lions off a field goal? I'll bet it felt pretty good that the pendulum shifted the other way. And it was even better that Dan Campbell gave the guy a game ball, knowing that he couldn't find a kicker to save, his backside last year. And all of a sudden he's got one, so he doesn't have to gamble as much on fourth down as he did last year. Because sometimes when you don't have a kicker who's doing that well, you're going to make decisions trying to overcome the problem. Here, at least he's able to play a conservative, realistic type of football than he was able to do before. And George, I don't worry about whether I hate you do nothing or not, but what kind of a car do you drive, George?
A Ford,
Yeah, okay. What kind of Ford, George?
a Focus. Why?
Okay, well, just keep your focus on one thing, pal, and that's this. Okay, you know what? You wouldn't even have to use any mileage considering how many miles he had to go from one league to another. So, and is there a pun intended? You better believe there are. We throw a couple of those out your way. But Jake Bates has done a good job. Hopefully, he'll continue to do that. But think about it. The United Football League has a use. Okay, it's a useful league. And I looked at the last stats there. I believe there are 80 players from the UFL that signed contracts, is what I do to go into the NFL. So it's working out pretty well, and I don't think they're going to do it this year, but don't be surprised in the next 2 3 years if they don't expand the UFL a little bit. But right now,
They're already
it's
talking about it.
oh they are okay. Well,
Yeah,
good
they're
then.
talking about with either this year or next year. The expansion will be another 8 teams, so it'll be 16 teams total.
Oh really? No
Wow.
kidding. They're going to go 8.
Hmm.
Wow.
Didn't know that. Well, you know what we'll do though, Jeremy, since we're running into a time situation, we'll probably talk about that at a later date on this show. But you know, the United Football League, folks, is doing an excellent job, and all you need to see when you have more and more injuries taking place, at least you can find talent other places like in that league, and you may find more UFL players later in the year than you would beforehand because many of these guys are trying to rest a little bit and deal with what they had to do before they ended up playing football
Oh
now.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
do
I
have
agree.
another fourth week in a row thing to talk about before we get off here. And the fact for the fourth week of the row, the Lions have had an NFL Player of the Week, and this week it's Special Teams Player Jake Bates.
there you go, great stuff, Jeremy. One last question I have for you, and it's only you, not you, George. Any new news on the pass rushing front?
Well, the latest that I heard is it's a good thing we're playing the Titans this weekend because with them having the fire sale, they made a trade for their starting linebacker for a backup linebacker and a fourth round pick to the Seahawks. Ernest Jones is now a Seahawk, and they got their backup. I can't even name the name because that's how inconsequential this guy's been.
Okay.
But he went to the Seahawks. They sent D Hop to the Kansas. The fire sale is on. So there's two guys that I heard the Lions are looking at, and one of them I've actually mentioned, Harold Landry, and the other one is Arden Key. And they get to see them up close and personal this weekend. And I bet you the deal gets done Monday out of which one they like. Otherwise, it'll be one of the other four players I said.
Okay. Well, no, that's what I want to find out. You obviously have a pulse on this organization as much as you do. I try to pay attention and I look at a
So
lot of the media releases that come my direction and I'm always watching, but I don't have to really work that hard because I got you. I have you following up on it and you know full well we're going to come, if there is a
I
transaction made, you're going to announce it.
I do have one more bit of information, and that came for Adam Schefter this morning on 97.1 The Ticket, and that has to do with the possibly suspended, and I'm putting the air quotes up because I
Okay.
doubt it happens now. Jamison Williams. Come to find out, he's had ADHD the entire time, and he's been on the exempt list because he's been taking the brand name of whatever drug he has to take for it in his life, which means they can't test him for it. Well, this last time his script was filled, his doctor switched him to the generic form of this drug. And we all know how the generic companies work. Sometimes they don't exactly clean the equipment as good, and it can cause false positives for other things in tests.
Hmm.
So all of this is being investigated by the NFL. That's why the suspension hasn't been made official on the NFL side. And more than likely, if it is sent as a suspension, the Lions can appeal it. Jamison Williams is playing week 8 either
Good
way.
enough good enough for
Okay.
me. So,
All
all right.
right.
Well,
Good to
that
hear.
does conclude this edition of the Motor City Mad Mouse Show. My name is Scott Morganroth. Pleased to be joined by my co-host George Eichhorn and Smoking Jeremy Ballrick. Those are both of them right for the South Florida Tribune and the Motor City Tribune as well. And we appreciate them lending their expertise here on Wednesday night here on the Motor City Mad Mouse Show here on No Filter Network. So, on behalf of my two co-hosts, my name is Scott Morganroth, and we will see you next week at this time. Have a great weekend, everybody, and be safe, be careful. And Jeremy, do you have one thing, words of wisdom that you like to end the show with?
Try every day to be a better person than you were the day before. That's the only way to make the world a better place. It starts right here. Much love.
There you go. We're done. See you next Wednesday. Good night, everybody.
All right.